So, John, first I'd like to just ask you, what was life before treatment for you?
Life before treatment was a lot of falling asleep during the day, or when I was not sleeping, being tired. I was in the Navy and in aviation. We got call signs, and before I got my official call sign, one of the ones that I got initially was dozer, because I'd fall asleep in briefs. Driving a car was often an interesting event. My sister tells the story to this day that I was dropping her off at college, and we were going through the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and I went through the tunnel asleep. As I said, I flew, and it was caused me concern. The airplane that I flew, we would normally fly 4 to 6 hour flights, and so there were times when I'd fall asleep in the airplane, and thank God for autopilot. I went through a period for 30 days on a ship one time where I never slept for about more than an hour a night. So I then discovered Ambien, so I would get a prescription for that as well. But you couldn't take Ambien when you were deployed. But so it just did the medication aspect. I It was a horrible story for me at the time, but I was with a four-star admiral. I was his aide, and we were on a VTC with the chief of naval operations and everybody around the world. And I was sitting behind him as he was on the VTC, and I fell asleep and I snored. And so that went out for God and country to see, and he turned around and yelled at me and said, get out of here, go wake yourself up. But it did affect me. When I first got diagnosed, I was still deploying, so I couldn't get a CPAP machine, and they gave me an oral device. And that helped. It certainly helps with the snoring aspect, but in fact, it was after that event that I just talked about with the admiral. I said, something's not working here, and I knew I had sleep apnea, and I knew there were CPAPs out there, so I went and got another sleep test and got the CPAP machine, and I remember the first period after using the CPAP machine, it was a marked difference. I felt like it was. That's what good sleep, what real sleep was like with that machine. But there were drawbacks for me, and I stopped using it. Well, I really like the way I feel when I do use it. So
it worked when you used it.
Like you read about.
Yeah. Technicolor?
Yes. Yeah.
So what advice would you give others, given your experience so far?
The machine works. Figure out how to use it. I think that I was never taught how to push the buttons or how to put the mask on or anything like that. And I think that there's some technique, because I can tell when I have a seal and I don't have a seal. But it does work. I think that there may be some alternatives with the oral device, but that's not giving you the pressure breathing that I think it's really effective. For those who, sleep apnea is an underpublished disease, if you want to call it disease. I guess it is a disease. And, many times I often felt, well, you're not measuring up because you're falling asleep here during the day. And with the people that it doesn't happen to, what's the difference? Well, you must be lazy or whatever the thing is. But
so there's a kind of an inherent bias, isn't there?
Oh, it really is,
you're weak if you're not, able to stay awake. And
I can't tell you the number of times I myself will sit around in the room and you see the people fall, dozing off, and wow, you're a real slacker. How come you didn't prepare properly? Or
we're taught to be judgmental in that. Yeah.
It is there's a stigma associated with it. There really is.
So how do people get over the stigma? What advice would you tell somebody?
I don't know. Maybe the awareness for sleep apnea would probably help a lot. I know I see people now. In fact, there's a guy at work, I could tell instantly that he had sleep apnea because I could just hear him yawning over there, see him doing that. He fell out of the chair one time at his desk. which I've done before too. And I said, hey, Mike, I think you have sleep apnea. You need to go get checked. It took him, he went through the VA, and it took almost a year, but he ended up getting a machine, and he came back and said, I can't thank you enough for that.
Yeah.
But there's not a big awareness of the disease, of the effects. Treat it with coffee, or treat it
Yeah.
with medication, or the effects of it, not really the disease itself.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. So we want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us and talk about it with others. I think it's hard to kind of get a handle on how many people you can positively affect. And personally, I've done the same thing. I've talked to people, and then they'll come back a couple of years later and tell me, it saved my life, you saved my marriage. Thank you so much. And it was a small gesture on my part, but it really paid off for some people. And so, being an advocate like you are is really important. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me here.